What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did Its Marvel Pair Up show, Loki Through the Years, where we take every episode of Loki and we pair it up finally with a time travel movie, hoping to explore its themes, characters, ideas, rules, and how these wacky genres keep coalescing and moving the Marvel universe forward. As always, I am your host, Blake Schultz, and with me is Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And Jamie Jurok.
Hello, greetings.
And here we are with episode 3. We are halfway through it. We got one of the best episodes of Doctor Who and Star Trek that I've seen in years. Some really great character building, an incredible atmosphere, reveals everywhere. I'm hearing some conversations that this is a filler episode, and I think this is building characters in a way that you can really only do in the television space. These are moments that we don't get in full-length feature films because they have to be, 90 minutes to 2.5 hours, and then they cut those down to more theaters to make more money. And here we can sit and drink on a train for an hour if we want to. And this fan of My Dinner with Andre will sit and do that for some time. Jamie, what did you think of episode 3 of Loki?
I loved it. I mean, first of all, it's the first major MCU character to come out as queer.
You don't think the Russo brothers cameo in Endgame counts?
And I mean, as a bisexual person, hearing Loki say the words, a bit of both, was like, I mean, Terrence literally tweeted at me because he knew that I lost my mind. It was the happiest I've ever been, other than seeing Elizabeth Olsen and Kathryn Hahn be really close to each other. But yeah, no, I loved it. And the filler episode thing makes me so mad. People who say that, I think, one, don't understand television, and two, I feel like they're all about the destination. They're not about the journey. People who call this a filler episode just want to know how it's going to tie into the MCU. They just want to know where it's headed. And that's not how you enjoy content. That's not how you consume content. This episode, we learned so much about Loki. We learned about Sylvie. I think calling it a filler episode is an injustice to television in general, because I mean, a filler episode is the kind of episode where I think of the Zeppo, which is a Buffy episode where you follow Xander when he's on shenanigans and losing his virginity while the rest of the team is dealing with an actual legit apocalypse. That's a funny, silly thing. This is an episode where the main characters got to explore and learn about each other, and we got to learn about them. And so anyone calling it a filler episode loses my respect.
As they should. I'm with you there. I think it's weird. I think a lot of, especially sci-fi does, good sci-fi, when you're doing a series, typically starts taking its time around the middle of whatever arc that they are telling. So as a person who's a huge Star Trek fan, I was like, oh no, this all tracks. A lot of times they get stranded on a remote planet, or they go back in time, and it's just literally two characters figuring out themselves. And that's kind of what this is. I think where some people are coming in, I get it a little bit, is that we only have 6 episodes. So they're kind of like, hey, if this is episode 3 and we only got 6, at some point in this episode, or at least the very next, we should sort of start getting a little bit more of the thread of what this entire series is about, or the season is about. And I don't think we've quite gotten there yet. And that's where some people are having an issue. But me, I can sit here and watch the two of them have a conversation all day, and that satiates my appetite. The sequence of them just talking is phenomenal. I also think that we do get a bit of bang for our buck here, because that long take at the end of this episode is fantastic. It's a really well intense sequence, and it just ends on I just die laughing, because the look that Sylvie gets when well, shit, we're stuck here. And she just turns around. I was like, that's great. I love it. And it just goes to black like this. That's awesome.
That music drop was so good.
It is. I think that's fun. I can watch Loki and Sylvie respond to each other all day. I love that they are sort of learning that they basically have gone through the exact same thing on their timeline. I love that they're figuring each other out and kind of oh, I've been through that, but mine's slightly different. And you sort of using her as a linchpin to sort of see what he has been going through. And you deeply learn how much he really misses his mom. And I hope that Rene Russo shows up in this series somewhere, because I think he should have that moment that Thor had with her in Endgame.
I completely agree with you. And where I disagree with a lot of the conversation about this episode on the internet, and Jamie kind of said it, we want to see how this ties into the MCU. We're only 3 episodes in, so where's my big bang? I think you got it in that conversation. The big bang of this episode that moves this story forward is what we need to do in time travel and multiverse stories, which is go, what is the difference here? We're now learning about a character, Loki, and another character, Loki Sylvie, and their differences and similarities. We are seeing a lot of, oh, she knows that she was adopted. And how does that change her character from Loki not knowing he was adopted? We are witnessing what makes these characters tick in a way that will generate a payoff later on in the show. We don't know everybody's full motivations. This is kind of building in the moment before and the characterization that we would have. Complaining about jumping to episode 6 would be like watching Endgame without Iron Man 1, 2, and 3. And complaining that Iron Man 2 was filler and that Age of Ultron was filler. And if there's one thing the MCU has done, it has taken every little part of every movie that we don't really care about and gone, did you know that was the most important thing in the whole world?
Looking at you, Dark World.
The best, I think the greatest like FU Marvel has ever done is like, guess how important the Dark World is. I think that's hilarious. I don't, even though that movie is a bottom tier, it's like, it's at least it's got so many good characters, so it's fine to like revisit.
We learn also that all of these variants in the TVA are variants. These aren't homegrown people in the world of Zion. These are people who were abducted and are now being used against their will. This is an organization that is not to be trusted, an institution that is lying. These are things we didn't know. This changes everything about Owen Wilson. We need him to get on that jet ski because I bet that man was jet skiing all around the world in his life.
He was jet skiing all the time.
Turned left instead of right and whatever other rules these giant space lizards are dictating. We have done something that we also desperately need to do in time travel movies, which is generate stakes. It's really hard to go, what matters when nothing matters? A big problem I know some people have with Doctor Who is that eventually they just start hand waving, it's timey-wimey, and he's just going to go back, we're going to fix it, and we're going to snap our fingers and Deus Ex Machina every problem away. I know a lot of people when Endgame was doing their time travel was, well, why can't we now just go back in time and get Tony? We can't just go back in time and get Natasha now. Nothing really matters. We can just go back. It doesn't affect our present. Why can't we just bring these people back? It's hard to generate tangible emotional stakes. And by having them land in a event where the world is going to end, and then having these sci-fi devices not work, and they now need to get on this train and survive, alters the show in a way we hadn't had. So far, we were playing in rules that it didn't really matter. I was like, okay, whatever. He's a variant. He doesn't really matter to the MCU. This Loki can live in this TVA world, and we can do 20 seasons of this. We can Rick and Morty it in 8 seasons of Loki and Sylvie forever. We can just keep going. But now we've established that they can die. These are mortal immortals. And if we alter the rules and alter the stakes a bit, it does matter to them. She's furious when she can't get the time travel device from them. When they need to get back and it's drained, and we can't even do the rest of the show until this battery gets charged. That adds something that the show was missing. We now have a ticking clock and higher stakes, and we don't know what's going to happen. We've been left off in a part of it where we don't know.
Yeah, we also don't know. I mean, because it shifted to the planet, but I mean to the moon, but we also don't know what Sylvie wanted in the TVA. Like that she was clearly going after something. She knew something there, and so there's something that she's not telling Loki that she's aware of that's happening in that place. Until she gets back there, I don't think we're not going to figure that out. But I that's what's also fascinating. Like she knows something. I want to know what the hell she knows that's in there.
And this also built the world in a bigger way for me. We have never seen a planet like this in the MCU, and it was just like contextually different to see it. And it's part of the fun of sci-fi, of Rick and Morty, Star Trek, Doctor Who, all of these other world space-bounding adventures, is seeing these different planets and the different rules and different societies, and even watching how their magic had different rules and explaining it to each other. Oh, I'm creating illusions and the dagger's not real, and oh, you have to get into their mind and change their memories and get what you want, and seeing the difference in these characters who are ultimately the same person but in many ways are very different, which even leads us to wonder if this even is truly a variant of Loki. Are we going to get an Enchantress? Is she her own character? Or is there, as I've said it before, a real multiverse, and the TVA's big lie is saying that there is one main timeline? Or are there other TVAs that are justifying their other one timelines? Right. Where is this Sylvie from? Why did she denounce being a Loki? There's a lot of interesting things happening.
And how much of a badass is she? Because she doesn't know that her powers don't work in the TVA, and she kind of has a mental. She looks like, oh crap, my powers are working, and then she just goes and starts whooping ass. And she is a great hand-to-hand combatant. I'm like, whoa, damn.
Oh, she's so cool. I love her so much. I'm just so happy she exists. All of it, like, oh god, I just it's not. I'm not at WandaVision level of thrilled, but like I'm like it's close in terms of just how much joy this show is bringing me.
Yeah.
Also, shout out to director Kate Herron for giving the episode where Loki is confirmed bisexual all bisexual lighting. All 40 minutes of that episode was
purple is my favorite color, so I'm sitting here like, this is a good time. Let's watch all of this.
I'll happily sit and watch anything that looks like an old GameCube. I think that's going to be great. I don't see any issues with this.
Prince would be proud.
Right. The episode was great. The California raisin aesthetic for all the lighting was phenomenal. I liked seeing just people that we never see before. I liked building it up. Obviously, it's a huge deal having Loki be bisexual for the simple reasons that representation is obviously very important, and this episode matters a lot to a lot of people. But we are also being accurate to this character all the way back to Nordic mythology and his roots. There's never really been it all is great.
I also love that it's a throwaway. It's so simple, but even just the him slamming down his cup and saying another, just like his brother did. I was like, oh, I like it. You guys are definitely still brothers.
That was
and Tom singing. Oh my gosh.
I'll stop off for any of these fun character moments. I think this is what Marvel has always done best. And if we're going to get whole shows dedicated to these moments, that's what I want. I want Sam and Bucky talking about symbols, whipping the shield around in the woods. I want Vision talking about the ship of Theseus for 30 minutes. And I want Loki and Sylvie to talk about all of these things. This is the meat in the Marvel sandwich. The action is just the bread, and bread goes bad.
We don't get this in the film. We don't get the luxury of having these time moments or these moments. But as comic book readers, this is the majority of the book. is the meat and potatoes. The action sequences are usually just one big splash page. They've been expounded upon in film, but that's where we get the majority of what we want, is in the slower, smaller, more intimate moments, which we can now get in this media.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love action. I'm a sucker for it. But when I read comics, the action is like my least favorite part of comics. Because it's not as interesting as like my favorite comics are when they're just talking and expanding, and that's totally becoming true of the content on the screen. And like, again, I want to see action. That long shot was so good, but they're balancing it so well, and I'm so impressed.
Well, guys, that was episode 3 of Loki, which we obviously loved. And we have chosen a very specific series, although I just realized that Looper would have also been very good for this episode. But c'est la vie. Here we are talking about one of the most prominent, important, influential science fiction franchises of all time. It is time to talk about Star Trek, with a small focus on the 4th movie and the J.J. Abrams universe. But as we have done with all of these, we will be taking the context of the franchise as a whole. And I think this series matches up with this episode of Loki, not just for its time travel, but also for its aesthetic, for how it does sci-fi, the difference between science fiction and science fantasy. Terrence, tell us about your love and admiration of Star Trek. One of the only shows you love without any diversity.
Well, and then it's weird because that's where it fixes itself as it goes along. Because I grew up I'm not that familiar with the original series until I started going back and watching the films. I grew up on The Next Generation, and then Deep Space Nine blew my freaking brain, because I'm like, Avery Brooks, what? What are we doing? There's a black man that's the head of all this. So that's when I sort of started falling in love, and based on that, I went back and started watching the original series and the shows, and I just fell in love. I love when this show gets just the small, intimate stuff. And this is what this episode reminded me of, because when you put them on a planet, you basically strand them there, like they're stranded. They can't do anything. You kind of just have those moments of heart to heart. I know we're talking about the films, but that original series, there's an episode where it's a time traveling one called The City on the Edge of Forever, which is probably one of the best time traveling episodes that they've ever had. But how we were talking earlier, where it gets small, intimate, and just starts doing the heartfelt stuff, that was an episode that Star Trek really did, because McCoy loses his mind a little bit, goes back into the past, and Spock and Kirk have to go back to fix it. And while there, Kirk falls in love, and he's madly in love with this woman. But for him to fix the timeline, he has to let her die. And it's just like, oh, well, Jesus.
I guess you didn't watch Back to the Future 3.
Yeah, rules don't matter. We can do whatever we want, Marty.
Marty, I'm a god.
But it's moments like that Star Trek does in its entire history, where it's like, look, at this, yes, we're this big space epic and can do whatever we want, but when it gets down to the nitty gritty, like, we're telling a story between humans at the heart, like, but humanity, and we're just telling a heartfelt story that I think anybody can sort of relate to, and that's what Star Trek is just known so well for doing throughout all the series.
Jamie.
Yeah, I feel like I'm the world's most casual Star Trek fan, where I've seen like a lot of next gen and original series, and I've seen a good amount of the movies, and it's fun because I feel like the way I feel about Star Trek is how like most people probably feel about everything I really love, like normal people, that I get too hard. So so the J.J. Abrams, especially the first one, I've seen so many times. And then Star Trek 4 is my favorite Star Trek anything. I could watch Star Trek 4 every day forever. It is so funny. And I never really thought about it until watching it again yesterday, that they do not care about time travel rules in that movie. The one time Scotty like trades like information, like tech, to this guy, and someone's like, aren't you worried about how that's going to affect it? And he goes, he probably is the guy who invented it anyway. And that's the only time they ever care. And you know what? Sometimes stuff like that is like, no, you need to address it. But in Star Trek 4, when they're going back in time to the 80s to save the whales, it doesn't matter. It truly doesn't matter. So I ended up having like a big Star Trek marathon yesterday. I watched all the 3 new ones, and then I watched Khan, Search for Spock, and Voyage Home. And I realized I'm a little bitch for Bones. I didn't realize how much I love Bones. He's my favorite character.
He's current Bones or past Bones?
All the Bones, any kind of Bones. I'm really he's sexy, but like, he's funny. He's the funniest, and that's my bread and butter. Yeah. Ultimately, it was an interesting journey, because when the 2009 movie came out, I was obsessed with it. I saw it so many times, and now I barely think about it. I haven't watched it in years, and I think that's because of the MCU. The MCU kind of just came along and just was
dwarfed.
So better.
Yeah, it dwarfed the Star Trek franchise. Yeah.
But I will say the cast of the new movies, it's one of the best casting
from top to bottom
ever.
And even when whatever they add on, like oh cool, now the villain's Idris Elba, like shit, yeah, let's do it. No, they've been well cast. I enjoy all 3 of the JJ films. Even the third one.
Shout out to Justin Lin, because he did the third one.
That's true. But the third one, I like the most, like a Star Trek episode. Like, it feels like a Star Trek episode. It does the whole stranding on a specific place, and kind of that's what you do. The other 2 are definitely JJ's bread and butter type of, like, let's go bigger, better. And I don't quite know how I'm going to end this, but I will one day.
You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because my journey to Star Trek started, as many of my pop culture journeys did, with action figures. And finding ones from the original line at a flea market and buying them, and my mom being very excited to show me Star Trek, and me immediately going, this is slow and boring and cheap, and I want to watch Star Wars instead. Which led to then a lot of, as I grew older, conversations of Star Wars versus Star Trek, and science fantasy versus science fiction, and sci-fi is meant to, deal with real world things, and get heady and be about something, and fantasy is fantasy and it's fun. And I think as all of us have grown up and learned that gatekeeping is terrible and that you can in fact enjoy all versions of Star, both Trek and Wars and otherwise, these conversations that we had at old arcades and old comic book shops are meaningless. But it really wasn't until the J.J. Abrams 2009 version that I saw after one of my first Comic-Cons, and must have been the first reboot that I felt did it right, that grabbed a young audience, that pulled in the old audience, that really hit on all cylinders and built something new without throwing away all the old ones. They did a good job of building this time travel, multiverse, new version of the world, whatever you want to call it. But it's funny, Jamie, how you kind of bring up that their rules of time travel in these Star Trek shows have always sort of been dependent on the story that they're telling.
Correct.
Terrence brought up The City at the Edge of Tomorrow, which is about, putting the greater good above love. It's very much a story of doing what's better for everybody and not making selfish decisions, even though you could have a Doc Brown train and do whatever you'd like. Then you get to Star Trek 4, where we're just going back in time to the 80s. I don't really know why. We got to save these whales. We've got to derail the franchise for a while and give you some silly, campy, fun nonsense. But if anything that Star Trek and Doctor Who have taught me is that if your movies and shows have a long enough timeline, you can do whatever you'd like.
You're going to, yeah. You're gonna end up like Deep Space Nine. I think wound up having somewhere in their run a 30th episode of like the original Star Trek Tribbles episode. So they just literally did a time travel episode of just going back and recreating an episode with the Tribbles and just merging the two shows together. It's fascinating.
I gotta watch Deep Space Nine.
Oh, Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine is amazing.
I have
phenomenal.
Seen none of it. Like
Deep Space Nine is phenomenal. If you want to do some headier, like dealing with race, they were like, "Fuck it, we're in it. We got a black commander. We're going in. We're going to talk about all this shit."
Putting it on the list.
That's definitely a show that started out, and then all of a sudden was just like, "We're going to do the first interracial kiss. We're going to get some LGBTQIA. We're going to do this." The first
season of it is trying to figure itself out, and then they were like, "Look, we can't," because they came on at the same time as Next Generation was. The first season of that, they're like, "Let's compete with that," and they're like, "You know what? We can't be that. F it. We're going to do our own thing." And they just started getting headier and headier as they went along.
It's great. It's the best like alternative to space adventure movies. Like for every Star Wars I get, I want a heady, thought-provoking movie. And I think the what are they, the Kelvin universe? Is that what
Kelvin
we call
timeline? Yeah.
That's right. The Kelvin timeline is a really good epitome of both, because you get these really big galactic, incredible action set pieces and bombastic sequences, and then you shrink it down to the Chris's having a conversation or the Spocks having a conversation, which brings us into why we're using this storyline with this episode, which, as we've kind of talked about, the aesthetics were abandoned on a planet. There are a lot of reasons why Loki is clearly taking from both Star Trek and Doctor Who, but the main one is meeting yourself. This is one world, unlike Time Cop, which you talked about, and unlike Southland Tales, which I'm sure we'll never talk about, where two molecules cannot occupy the same space if they're the same. A lot of time travel movies get into if I go back in time and I touch myself, then of course I will destroy the world. We see it in Time Cop with the villain. We see it in Southland Tales with Sean William Scott shaking hands with himself and destroying everything. I love that wacky movie.
Wow, I haven't seen it, and it just way to ruin it.
Jamie, I assure you, the journey is way more important than the destination.
So bizarre.
The director of that movie blocked me on Twitter. She didn't. I think it was that movie, right? She it's a woman, right, who directed that?
It's the same director of Donnie Darko, and I don't know.
Oh, then maybe I'm thinking of something else.
No, it was Richard Kelly who did.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking of another movie. I don't know what I'm thinking of, but I need to watch Southland Tales.
You do. No, it's wacky.
It's bizarre.
I'm trying to. What director blocked me on Twitter? I'll figure this out and get back to you.
It's a youngish Rock is in that movie, so enjoy.
A very young Rock, Justin Timberlake, Sean William Scott.
I love Sean William Scott. I'm like an American Pie.
Oh yeah.
No, you're in it then.
He's great. His follow-up to Donnie Darko, the studio gave him carte blanche. I mean, it was a recipe for success.
There's
and
so
there's
much stuff
one
happening in
person
that.
and one person alone who likes that movie, and it's me.
Yes, it sounds like I will love it. But the 2009 Star Trek, it's so funny because I messaged you, Blake, when I was watching it, and I was like, whoa, this really does pair well with Loki. I was like, I didn't really think about it until I was in it. And also just the whole concept of that movie being like it's created its own alternate reality, and it addresses it, and the fact that Nimoy comes in is like it's a really awesome top tier version of how do we get the same characters and put them in a whole new thing and make it make sense, where you're like, that's not in the original because it doesn't matter, and they really address that hard, and I think that's cool, and I think that I think it really works for what's happening on Loki.
Yeah, it's interesting because the big, connecting set piece is the destruction of Vulcan, the end of this world, how it is affecting, it's too hot today, Zachary Quinto and his journey as Spock, dealing with being the captain of a ship, being unable to express any emotion because it will mean he is not capable of doing this mission. And then having met Leonard Nimoy and being told your friendship is going to be so meaningful and important.
Right. Like
I'm
that
telling
that guy's going to mean more to you than anything you ever have to think about.
One of my favorite Star Trek moments.
With the fact that in Search for Spock, that spoiler, Kirk's son dies, and he is so unaffected in comparison to how Spock's death. Like, his son might as well be a piece of garbage. He doesn't care because his death meant he got his husband Spock back.
We all have our priorities, Jamie. We all need a Vulcan man sometimes. And, you have this moment of like, I don't know, he's not emotionally compromised. The guy's a rock. Oh, I'm telling you, I'm emotionally compromised. And it's interesting because we're seeing a lot of different things, right? We're seeing thematically how the destruction of your home and your planet affects these characters, even though they're no longer in their proper timeline. In theory, none of this matters. But Loki, who has just read about Ragnarok and seen his own death, is devastated by this. And it is starting to motivate, and I'm sure it will more motivate the decisions he is now making. The knowledge of this future is what justifies the agency of the episode. Similarly, in Star Trek, the destruction of Vulcan, the agency of Leonard Nimoy, and the information that gives Chris Pine to then motivate him to do all these things to Spock that he knows are for the best. He's now going to destroy everything that Zachary Quinto has built to prove that he's emotionally compromised, not even to just selfishly lead the ship, but to prove to him that his greatest weapon is going to be this vulnerability in this human side that he has rejected for the sake of this mission. And I think we get an inverse of that with Loki, where he has been mostly calculating, mostly selfish. And in learning more and more about his death, and in learning more about Sylvie and her life, and how she has all this other knowledge and being adopted and the changes in his family, seeing him become more human. That it's almost the knowledge of trauma as opposed to the experience of that trauma that's awakening the human side of these characters, or at least pushing it to the front.
It's fascinating because we get to see two different Lokis, because we saw Loki that actually did deal with the death of his mother and did deal with the death of his father. We saw him and he did become more human. Now we're seeing a different version of that, who he didn't actually see it. He didn't actually live it. He has seen it and has read about it. And now how does this affect him if he doesn't actually physically go through it, which is fascinating, because he seems to be very deeply affected, more so by the Frigga thing than his dad, which makes sense because he wasn't that close to his father.
Well, he sees his dad. Oh no, that was in Ragnarok. I'm thinking of the Odin sleeping Thor.
Yeah. Him actually fading before Hela just comes and wrecks shops. He sees that part, and he sees that like he dies. So he sees all of this, and it just like it's coming at that same space in a different way. And we as an audience have the luxury of seeing him approach that or see that via two different windows, which is it's fun.
I completely agree. And it's interesting because then, in Wrath of Khan, I think less effectively, they use the same trick to just be like, hey, is this Khan guy dangerous? And Leonard Nimoy is like, yes.
Yeah, he is.
Not nearly as good or
No.
challenging, but it's very interesting to watch us deal with characters meeting each other and how that changes them. Because in theory, these should all be one-to-ones, but obviously they're not going to be. We're going to have new timelines and new Lokis and new Sylvies, and we haven't even seen the repercussions of this bomb. But
yeah, I was going to say that's the biggest thing about this episode is that the TVA is not in it other than the very first 10 minutes, and so it's just the two of them. But so we have no clue what the world is, what's happening around them, and the timelines that are happening around them. They could come in, people could come into this world, or they could get off that plane and go somewhere else, and all hell is broken loose. Like we have no idea what's happening other than what's happening with the two of them, which should be fascinating for whatever we get in the future.
Who knows?
I have a question for you guys. In terms of the Loki Sylvie of it all, it's been a bit of a debate on the internet whether or not you should ship them as a couple. And I know my answer, but I'm curious what you guys think about that. If you think it's messed up and gross, or if it's like, yeah, totally cool.
I am overall not a big shipper when it comes to fandoms and all of this. I know why people enjoy it. I'm not disparaging it. It's very fun. It's not really something I think about when I'm watching these shows, but I think if I had to give an answer, I have two and they're weird. My first one is you probably do whatever you want. These are fake characters. I don't care. Ship them if you want. They're attractive people. It's fun to watch attractive people smooch. Whatever. We don't have the ability to date ourselves in real life. I don't think it's that harmful of a thing. That being said, I guess if you did meet yourself, wouldn't you be a little curious?
That's the thing. This has been like you date your clone has been a debate forever, and I am 100% confident that yes, I would date a clone of myself. And the fact that like now it's coming, like what if it's you but a different gender,
like a gender that you would be whatever you're attracted to.
And
gender,
again, as a bi person, I would have gone for Lady Jamie.
Either way, you're like, yeah, I'm good.
But also, if there was a dude Jamie, heck yeah. So I think that people that are like, that's gross to ship them. It's not like they're siblings.
Yeah, so they're not siblings.
No, you're playing in very. I feel like the rules matter in your timeline, right? In my timeline, incest is bad. Incest is always bad.
But it's not incest.
But it's
not incest.
Right. And I also think that the two of them, just even in comics, the sexuality of a Loki is so fluid that it's kind of like, hey, I could easily see them banging out each other and it wouldn't seem so odd to me. Like, no, that tracks. That all makes sense.
I would hook up with myself, there is no doubt in the world that Loki wouldn't hook up. That is just like, there's no doubt in my mind. It's a fact. And I just like people online being like, don't ship them, it's gross. It's like, first of all, mind your own business who's shipping who. And second of all, really think this through. Because I think Loki would go.
I also think the internet has thought of much grosser things.
Yeah, I think we talked about this recently, I think last week, where it's like we've gotten like more prude, I think, as a culture.
See, I don't know, because every time like a Predator movie comes out, they're like, nah, I'd bang it. And I'm like, well, that's not okay.
Well, that's weird.
Everybody wants
thing.
Tom Hardy and his symbiote together. I feel like that's kind of weird.
I'm about that. I'm all about Eddie and Venom romance. That's something that I am like.
Only.
So it's like I said, this isn't my world. I'm not
my world.
If only the Venom symbiote is talking and giving a dialogue the whole time, that would be fantastic. That's when it's good.
Yeah, I don't have a super strong opinion on it. Have your fun. Have your fiction fun. Don't hurt anybody in the real world. That's kind of my only advice.
I agree. Like, I don't really go down the shipping corridor either, but these are the two characters that I'm like, if they're going to do it, I don't see why not. I feel like any of those gods, especially when you start dealing with gods and Clash of the Titans, all those type of people, they were banging everybody. So
I also feel like if Austin Powers could have a threesome with himself and Heather Graham in the post-credit scene of Austin Powers 2, The Spy Who Shagged Me.
All bets off.
And we all laughed when he was like, "We all sexy bitches." I think then this is okay.
Yeah.
I think if we can all have a good laugh at Mike Myers telling himself he's sexy to his whatever 10 minutes ago Austin. It wasn't even the 60s or 70s. It was Austin from 10 minutes ago.
I mean, Game of Thrones is arguably like one of the most popular shows of all time, and that had a very casual brother and sisters were hooking up. I feel like Game of Thrones kind of set the bar of like, you can't get worse than this. Anything like this is Jamie and Cersei, and like this is Loki and Sylvia.
I feel like they're from other worlds. I feel like that's its
so
own
different.
rule. Yeah, these aren't. They're not even really like. If I took their DNA, I think it would come up as like two different family lines.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't think 23andMe is multiversing or anything like that.
I would like to say the only reason I'm not shipping it is because I want Loki and Mobius to be a thing. That's more my shipping side.
But Owen is the Silver Fox is getting a lot of love. He's getting a lot of love.
And yet Miss Minutes is left out of every shipping conversation.
She'll be back.
I think that's the show, guys. I think that's where we leave you. So send us all your shipping requirements, I suppose. Weigh in on this hotly debated debate, ripping the internet apart at a time when unity could not be more important. We are driven down the middle by this conversation. But of course, you should leave us a review. You should leave a comment on the YouTube channel. You should subscribe. You should follow myself, that as always, Blake, Terrence at Terrence Tatum, and Jamie at Jamie Cinematics. And you should, of course, follow the show at Hollywood ADI. We also do other shows on the Hollywood Already Did It podcast channel. Jamie, of course, has her writing at BuzzFeed and comicbook.com. And that's it.